even those latecomers have already.
Absolutely. Great. Okay, should I start?
I would request Devki to welcome you to the session, and then
Absolutely.
you could carry on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhinji. A very good evening to everybody joining in from India and those who are joining in from other parts of the world. I heartily welcome all of you to this August webinar of CITLoB. I'm Devki Kunte from Language Services Bureau. And I would quickly like to introduce our guest speakers today. We have Mr. Lester Kobili and Mr. Matich from MCIS. Dushan is the manager for training and vendor relations. He holds a degree in linguistics and MA degree in cultural policy. His experience in interpretation, translation, editing, and proofreading has helped him gain a deep understanding and knowledge of the translation and interpretation industry. That language is the most important part of cultural identity, and that linguistic rights are one of the essential pillars of human rights. And I completely agree. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. Dushan to provide us with insightful details on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a beautiful introduction. And I'm really happy that we are here with you tonight. In Canada, it's morning. And I'm so looking forward to our future collaboration. And this is just the first step. So thank you for having us. I'm going to share my screen right away. And I'm not gonna do the full view because I want to be able to see the chat box below, because this is going to be a little bit interactive. So first of all, once again, my name is Dushan. I'm a training vendor relations manager. I have a university degree in translation and linguistics. I've been doing translation for 17 years, and I've been teaching translation for 5. So as you already know, today's topic is defining translation and understanding the translation workflow. And I just want to be straightforward right now. We are very limited on time. So this is a short overview of the topic rather than a comprehensive lecture and discussion. And let's be honest, we can truly talk for hours and hours about this topic. And we would really need days to properly analyze all aspects of what translation is and what translation workflow is. However, I promised you that in 45 minutes, we can give a decent overview of these topics. So let's begin. Let's not lose any time. I'm so excited, and let's start. So, okay, it works. Perfect. So let's talk about the lesson objectives today. We will try to review the existing definitions of translation and its key concepts. We will introduce types of translation and other specific terms associated with them. And we will present the steps of the entire translation process. After we do that, the learning outcomes are actually on completion of this webinar, you should be able to understand the scope of translation through looking at various definitions and key concepts, identify various types of translation, and recognize and follow the sequence of steps in the translation process. So, during this webinar, we will look at various approaches to defining translation and discuss the key concepts and translation types of translation. Then we will present the general workflow of the translation process, main activities, and key players. So let me ask you the question. What is translation? If somebody asks you right now, literally comes to you, and person who never heard of translation, and you say, I work in the translation industry, or I'm doing translation, what would you say? Type anything in the chat box below. What would you tell them in a couple of words? So not even a whole sentence. What is translation? Please type in the chat box below. I'm just wondering, what is translation? And then we will talk about the definition, and we will talk why is it so important to define translation. Let's see. Please type in the chat box below. What is translation? I'm not sure if I can see the messages or nobody is typing, which is also fine.
I can read
There
it
are
out for you.
responses coming in. If you want, I can read them out to you.
Oh, please, that would be ideal because so I don't stop the sharing screen. Yes, what is translation? What are people saying?
So Anuj Jaisinghani, he says transformation of your idea, content, or message from one language to another.
Love it.
Anirudh Mukola, he says conversion of a language to another such that the meaning and the context of the communication remains the same.
Yeah, absolutely.
Convert words into another language.
Perfect.
And says conveying the thought and purpose in the source text in a way that will be understood as intended by the target audience.
I love it. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. I'm sure that whenever you say what translation is, it's very clear. I love the definitions. And guys, you're very, very fast. I love it. There is no thinking. You were typing right away. Amazing. Yes, some great definitions, and we will talk about them as well. So first of all, let me say that, and I'm sure you all know that, it is a very, very difficult task to come to one and consistent definition of what translation is. As throughout the history and time, translation has meant so many different things and definitely reflected the trends of different times. So that is the fact. However, why is translation so important and why is it so important to define translation? Well, it is very important to define translation to get a better understanding of the field, process, and role of the translator. So let's talk about the origins a little bit. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to start defining the concept of translation is to look at the origins of the words that we use to express this concept in different languages. It is really important to talk about etymology to understand where translation is coming from. So for example, as you can see on the screen, in English, the word translation is derived from a Latin word, translatio, which means carried across or bringing across. And then in modern Romance languages, such as French, Spanish, Romanian, word translation is derived from a word traducere, which means, let me just move it, to lead across. So very, very similar, but it's really important to see why we say translation the way we say it. So for example, nowadays in French, translation is traduction, in Spanish, traducción, in Romanian, traducere. So I really want to know about India is a beautiful place with so many different languages. And let me ask you the question. Think of and I will need, again, help from our amazing facilitators to read from the chat box. Think of the words you use for translation in your language. And what is the meaning of that word? And I know there are so many languages in India, so please type in the chat box below. Tell me the name of the word and also please literal translation. What does it mean if you try to explain it? Please type in the chat box below. I really want to understand how word translation, what is the meaning in your language and how it came from. I see Sudhin thinking carefully. And as you see answers coming into the chat box below, I would ask somebody to assist me and to read, and I'm sure that it's easier for you to pronounce the words and also to tell me the meaning. Okay, the answers are coming, which is amazing. Let's see the chat.
There hasn't been any answer yet. If you could please repeat your question, perhaps.
So the question is, think about word translation in your language. How do you say translation? And what does it literally mean? What is the literal meaning of the word translation in your language? So what is the word that you use in your language? And I'm sure there are many different speakers of many different languages with us today, many different languages spoken and used in India. So what is the word that you use and what does it mean? Literal meaning. And even if you're not sure, just say it out loud. I see Sathin is like thinking very carefully, so maybe he can actually join and tell us. So Hin, why don't you actually turn on your microphone and tell us? I'm really wondering.
Yeah,
okay.
So I was about to say that you asked a very difficult question from an Indian perspective, you know. So we do a lot of translations. But if, like, for example, somebody has just written Anuvad is a word that they use in Hindi for translation, and I can see in Marathi they write Bhashantar. Now, in another language, I think maybe in Urdu, probably it could be. Please correct me, somebody in the audience, if I'm wrong. But there is a word called tarjuma. So that could be another word. But I think tarjuma is again something similar like Arabic. You have tarjuma and all. That's also very similar for word for translation. So you already have in the chat box Anuvad, then you have Bhashantar, and then I gave a word called Tarjuma, 3 words.
Amazing. Amazing. And thank you so much. And look how beautifully this explains what translation means in each one of these languages. Anuvad in Hindi, to convert written text into another language. This is very straightforward. I love it. In one word, so this is the literal meaning. Great. So then we have in Marathi, conversion of words of sentences from one language to another without changing the meaning. Very interesting.
Well, I think that is quite strictly the definition of Bhashantar, whereas the meaning of literal meaning could be inter languages or between 2 languages.
I love it. So between, okay. I was actually wondering, how is it possible in one word such a clear definition? Okay, between 2 languages, bridging between languages. Love it, love it. Excellent, excellent. So that's really interesting. And to truly understand what translation is, we have to, I know it sounds so basic, but there are so many translators. Yeah, and I know it sounds so basic, but many translators, and I've been in this industry for 17 years, have never even thought where it came from historically. And again, we can have another 2-hour session, how translation started in human history. That would be a phenomenal, but again, we are very limited on time. So it's really important to know where this is coming from and why we started doing translation. So let me tell you a couple of interesting examples. So we heard a couple of languages that are being used in India, which is amazing, thank you. In ancient Greek, the word for translation is metaphrasis, which means speaking across. And in Dutch, vertaling, which is really interesting. Literal translation means re-languaging. So you're using your language, you're re-languaging things, which is very, very interesting. And also something else that when we talk during our training, and our training for translators is amazing for professional translators in Canada. It's very comprehensive. And then we go to the next slide and people are telling us, oh my gosh, why are you showing us this? Well. I know it might sound basic, but as a professional translator, as a professional language professional, it is essential to understand where languages you're using are coming from, to understand why and how some languages are related or different from one another. So for example, I'm a professional translator for English, Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. As a translator, I do need to know where they belong to, what are the similarities, what are the differences. We have to understand where the languages we are using in our professional work are coming from. This is very essential. We don't have time to go through this entire languages family tree, but it's very important as a professional language professional to understand that and to clearly know where your languages are coming from. And now, if you want a simple definition, okay, there's so many definitions of what translation is. But if you want a simple definition of translation, we can say that translation is a process or a product of transforming or transferring written text from one language to another. However, translation is different things for different groups of people. For people who are not translators, it is primarily a text, but for professional translators, it's an activity. And it is also important to know this difference. Translation as a product, as a process, and as a field. So we need to understand this difference. As a product, translation is a result of a translation activity. For example, the book is translated from English into Arabic. So this is a product, the book that has been translated. But then we have a translation as a process. As a process, translation is an activity that produces a translated text. And the last but not least, translation is also considered an area of applied linguistics. It is a professional field, right? Translation is actually considered an industry as part of language industry. So when people ask me, so what's your area of expertise? Where do you work? What's your field? I'm always saying I work in a language industry. I'm working in a translation industry. I'm working in translation. So that's really important to know that translation for some people is simply a product. They don't understand what it is. They just know, okay, this book has been translated. For us, this is our passion. This is who we are. This is a process. This is our life process. This is what we do. But also when we study translation, it is a field. So there is a very simple exercise, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but let's just briefly talk about this. For example, when we say the company of, here are just some very basic examples. When we say the company offers free translations to low-income families, this is what we are very often do as MCIS, as non-for-profit social enterprise. That means this is a product. In this particular case, translation is a product. But when we say language teachers love using translation in class and home assignments, in this case, translation is a process. But then think about this. When we say she decided to major in translation at college, in this particular case, translation is a field. And then an English translation of the recent Murakami's novel is already available. In this case, translation is already also considered to be a product. And again, for somebody who's a professional translator, who's been in the industry for 5-10 years, and I'm sure that there are many professional translators here, for them this might be too basic. But somebody who's just starting, somebody who's interested in the field, this is essential to know the difference, to understand the difference. Because when you communicate with different people, they might not understand what you're talking about. You might be talking about translation as a process, they're going to be talking about translation as a product, and somebody else who is in school, they're going to be talking about translation as a field of study. Another thing, okay, so let me just give me a second. Okay, so every single field of work, of science, whether it's translation, medicine, sociology, law, any field, if it is a trade, has a set of universal terms and concepts that are recognized and accepted by everyone within the field, irrespective of the language and culture. For a professional translator, it is essential to be very familiar with professional terminology. And let me tell you this, I've been in translation again for so many years, and all the time, not all the time, it's not fair to say all the time, but very often I run into people who don't know basic translation terminology. As a professional translator, yes, you have to speak, be fluent and have an amazing knowledge of two languages, but you have to master terminology and you have to master common concepts of your industry. And again, I'm just going to briefly tell you some basic terms, and this is just to scratch the surface. So we have to know what source text is. We have to know what target text is. We have to know what source language is, target language, target audience, unit of translation, context, code, message, equivalence, adequacy, translatability. This is like a secret language. So somebody who is asking you to do translation work for them, they might not know all of this, but as a professional translator, we have to master, and this, dear professional translators, this is just 10 terms, 15 terms here. There are so many of them, and we have to master them. Yeah, I run into my life like so many translators. Yeah, I know 2 languages, and you ask them, so what's the target language? What's the target audience? What about translatability of this text? And they're like, what are you talking about? So once again, we have to always be very familiar with common concepts of translation, with terminology. This is a foundation. So we have to know what the definition is. We have to know where our languages are coming from. We talked about languages 3. We have to know about terminology. We have to know a difference between translation as a process, translation as a product, translation as a field. These are the fundamentals of our profession. I mean, I hope that in the future we will have more chance to talk about each one of these topics. I know I'm flying through the topics, and it's just almost not fair. I'm But you know what? This is just the first webinar, and we are just talking briefly about everything. So let's go to the next slide. This is one of my favorite topics. So we already spoke about translation as a process, a product, and a field, and briefly mentioned the main concepts that help define. Very briefly, we talked about this for only a couple of minutes. Now let's talk about different types of translation. And let me be straightforward. There are many classifications of translation. And these classifications rely on different characteristics of the process or the product. And we can talk about this in different types of translations and classification for hours, for days. During our program, we talk for 5 hours about different classifications of translation, to be completely honest. And this is a beautiful topic. But one of the most common and most basic classification is general translation versus specialized translation. And again, this is the simplest, the most basic classification of translation. It's not wrong, but it's very basic, but still very important. So, general translation is the translation of documents that do not refer to any specific domain or subject area. They do not belong to any particular type. They do not entail any specific translation process or the use of specific equipment. For example, we talk here about translation of letters, different articles in newspapers, different presentations. We can say that's a general translation. And then we have specialized translation. Specialized translation is the translation of materials from a highly specialized field, targeted in a particular audience or embedded in a particular medium, and requires the use of specific procedures and tools. And let me tell you, there's so many kinds of fields of specialized translation. I'm just going to list them now. And again, we can talk about each one of them for an hour. But let me just tell you, technical translation, which is materials belonging to a particular area of knowledge, technical field. Then we have translation of the literature, literary translation, fiction, drama, poetry, commercial translation, financial translation, legal, biomedical and pharmaceutical, scientific, IT translation, marketing and advertising translation, certified translation, community translation, institutional translation. And let me not even start about my favorite field, subtitling, dubbing, localization. These are all the kinds of specialized translation. So once again, if you really want to make the very basic classification of translation types, there are two types, general and specialized. But within the specialized translation, there are many different subtypes of translation. And I'm telling you, during your careers, you might specialize for one of two fields, special fields of translation. And it's really beautiful. That's what I love about translation. There are so many different fields of translation that you can specialize, you can focus. You can focus to those fields and become the best of the best. But again, this is a topic for another webinar that I hope you will have very soon. So now we are coming to this major chapter. Let's finally get familiar with the steps of the translation process. Let's talk about the translation workflow. And why is this so important? Let me tell you. We are dealing with translators every day in our work. And I met thousands of translators in my life. And one thing that I can tell you that many translators have, when they start especially, they have no idea what it means to be a translator. They think you get 2 pieces of paper. And I'm coming from Eastern Europe, so back home people still are, translators are old school a little bit more. But, with 21st century, with technology, translation is not somebody gives you 2 pieces of paper like it was 10 years ago when I was studying translation, and you just do it. Translation has so many steps nowadays. And for anybody in this industry, we have to be fully aware what are the steps in the translation process and who is involved in the translation process. Translation process is very complex. And once we understand it properly, it's going to be easier for us to do translation. It's going to be easier for us to ask for the proper amount of money for the work that we do. It's going to be easier for us to understand how much work we have to do. We have to value ourselves more. Because again, many people think you speak, you can write in 2 languages, you're good, that's enough. You get 2 pieces of paper, let's do translation. No, no, and no. And that's why many translators get so shocked because they start working for agency and agency starts talking about proofreading, post-editing, pre-translation, post-translation, and people are lost. They're like, what's going on here? And this was my story, coming from Serbia, where translation was a little bit more simple. Coming to Canada and started working for so many different agencies and organizations initially, I was lost. People were using terms I never heard of. People were using, technology that I never knew of. But also it's the age, right? 20 years ago, the machine translation basically didn't exist. Some beginnings. I don't even remember internet. Yeah, there was internet, but just beginnings. Okay, so let's talk. So the actual work of the translator is a long and complex sequence of steps between the moment the need for translation arises and the moment the translated material is made available to its end users in the required form and on the appropriate medium. It also includes the cooperation with other players, such as a revisor, a client, a project coordinator, even a graphic designer. In short, the activities involved in providing a translation services fall into three main phases: pre-translation, translation, and post-translation. And they are translators, as you probably know, or if somebody is new in the field, you'll learn right now. As a translator, you are most likely involved in all three steps. So you're not just doing translation. You're also involved in pre-translation, post-translation, translation, and it's a fun process. So I want to be very careful when I'm talking about this. Although there are, of course, variations to some steps depending on the translation project. This sequence that I will be talking about is more or less what normally happens. And keep in mind, if you do localization, it might be very different. If you're doing subtitling, the steps might be different. Not completely different, but different. So when I talk, I'm going to be talking about what usually happens. So let's talk about this. We still have time. Okay, we are good. And please stop me if I'm talking too fast. I'm well known to talk extremely fast, so please stop me. Okay, thank you, Steve. So let's talk about this. This is a really beautiful process that I love, and I'm sure that you're going to learn a lot of different things, and don't get overwhelmed. Maybe you're not using all of these steps, and that's fine, but I just want you to make sure that we cover every single step. So let's start with the first step, which is pre-translation. And this is a fun part. So the first step is pre-translation. This is any step before the moment the translator receives the material for translation, such as getting a job, preparing an estimate or a quote, negotiation about the pay sometimes, getting proper specifications from the client, and contract signing. So the dream of a translator is that somebody tells you, here you go to one document translated, easy breezy, here's the money that you want to get, everything is clear. Well, that's a dream. Never happens. I mean, rarely. But very often, again, what does it mean to get a job? Pre-translation. Many translators, my friends and colleagues are saying, oh, I just want to do translation. Why do I have to bother with getting the job and receive why do I have to bother with pre-translation? But you do have to. That's part of the package. So what does it mean getting a job? Let's talk about, okay. So let's talk about this. That means when we say getting the job, it means prospecting the job, prospecting for the job, negotiating with the client, reaching the agreement in regards to terms and conditions of the service, as well as the time schedule, estimate, and mode of delivery, and agreeing to provide the service, signing and accepting the contract, and signing the confidentiality agreement. Once again, there's a lot of work before we receive the text. It's very uncomfortable sometimes. We have to negotiate the pay, and we have to discuss timelines. We feel very uncomfortable. I still feel very uncomfortable to say, hey, you're asking for 10 pages in 3 days. It ain't gonna happen, and I need more money. And it's very uncomfortable. It's awkward. It's weird. And especially as translators, we are well known to be we love to read and to translate, but we have to develop also this whole set of skills, communication skills, negotiation skills, fighting for ourselves. Because if we don't, trust me, nobody's gonna fight for us. People are gonna, I'm not gonna say take advantage, nobody's gonna take advantage, but people are gonna try to get best value for their buck. And that's normal. The client always wants to get the best quality for the least amount of money. So when it comes to getting a job, we do need to work a lot. We need to negotiate, to discuss the timelines, to discuss the pay, to agree to the terms and conditions, to talk about clarifications. And then there's this whole step that's called receiving the text for translation. What does that mean? Well, that's a text. That's a video if you're doing subtitling. It's a DVD if you're doing dubbing. Content of the website if you're doing localization. Also, this is all the reference materials, if applicable, of course, and taking the delivery of the material for translation. We need to check if the text is good fit for translation. We have to prepare a call-out form sometimes. We have to ask for clarifications from the client on any topics that might not be entirely clear. So let me just tell you one thing, and I'm sure many of you face that. So many times, like I get calls all the time from different clients, just asking me, hey, can you just do the translation? I receive the text, I have no idea what needs to be done there. I don't even understand what this is about. They give me page number 3 out of 10 pages. I don't know the context. I don't know anything. Like, you think that somebody's gonna give me from the law office. I work for a couple of freelancer, couple of law offices. They call me, they tell me, hey, here's the page translated for me. Can you do it by tomorrow? Wait. How much money? You want it by tomorrow, like a page that has tons of words. I don't even understand the context. Is it piece of the passport? What is this document? Give me the context. So there's so much work that needs to be done before the translation. That pre-translation process is sometimes overwhelming, sometimes frustrating, sometimes I'm asking myself, why did I even bother to be a translator? But actually, it can be a lot of fun. Once we develop this, confidence that we know what we are doing and that it is okay to ask questions, then this pre-translation process becomes fun. So once again, during pre-translation, there are 2 steps: getting the job and receiving the transfer for translation, asking for clarifications, discussing the pay rate, negotiating. And once that's all set, once that finally we are done with the pre-translation, we are going to the process where the magic happens. It's called translation. But guess what? It's not as simple as it seems. Within this second step, there are 3 steps: pre-transfer, transfer, and post-transfer. And I'm please asking you kindly to pay attention to this step. This step is essential. So once again, translation step, which is the second step of translation process, translation workflow, can be divided into 3 separate steps: pre-transfer, transfer, and post-transfer stages. Pre-transfer are all operations before the actual translation starts. And this is analyzing the material to be translated. What does that mean? Well, any quality translation requires a thorough analysis of the source text prior to translation. During this stage, the translator will be able to identify problematic issues that either need future clarification from the client side or documentation and research, as well as points that need to be discussed or negotiated. So it's not just to get a text to start translating the same second. No, you have to analyze the material over and over again to make sure that you understand it. Then the next step, searching for information, preparing raw materials, terminology mining and management, phraseology mining and management. And what does it mean, terminology and phraseology mining and management? It sounds confusing probably. Well, terminology mining and phraseology mining and management, this means that you need to get a full understanding of the source text, and you have to clear up any ambiguous or unclear points. So that's very important. You have to look for the relevant documentations. You have to look for study for the technical process, for example, of the project. Consult glossaries, parallel text to identify right collocations, set phrases, different sentence patterns, paragraph organizations, etc., etc. A lot of research needs to be done. And then the last step within pre-transfer is setting up the version for translation in the appropriate environment. If you are using CAT tools, computer-assisted translation, this step is actually usually taken care of by the tool. However, if you're not using a CAT tool, there are so many steps. You need to set up the necessary environment, prepare a version for translation, and many, many different things. Once you're done with the pre-transfer, this is when the magic starts as a translator. And this is what translators think is the translation. Once again, to be a translator means to take care of all of these steps. But usually translators think that only transfer is translation. And what does it mean, transfer? Well, transfer is shifting to another language or creating new text in a way that we will meet all the client specifications and the target audience's specifications in terms of content, form, and language. So finally, transfer includes translating the text by adapting, restructuring, and reorganizing with all necessary changes required by linguistic, cultural, commercial, technical requirements, and differences between the source language and the target language. And there is self-revision. The translator checks and revises the draft translation before passing it to the client or the reviser. So once again, I just want to go one step back. We had through the three steps: pre-translation, translation, post-translation. We talked about pre-translation, and now we're talking about translation. Within translation, we have three separate steps: pre-transfer, transfer, and post-transfer. And we are just right now talking about the transfer. Transfer is actually, as I already said, shifting to another language or finally creating new text in a way that we will meet all the client specifications and the target audience's expectations in terms of content, form, and language. And now, we did all of this pre-translation, and then we did pre-transfer, and now we did transfer, and we are saying usually, oh my gosh, finally, it's done, we're done. Well, you're not even close. We are going to the next step within translation, which is post-transfer. What does that mean? So you're done with the translation. You finally typed everything or wrote with a pen in OOLA if you love to do that. You're done with the translation and you did self-revision. You translated, you did the research, you set up the terminology, you analyzed the material, you finally typed 10 pages, you translated it, and you did self-revision. So you took care of it yourself. You did the revision and you were like, I just want to send it to the client, I'm done. You're not done. There's post-transfer. What does that mean? That means proofreading and revision, editing, correction, and any kind of validation. And let me tell you what that means. Post-transfer includes all operation after translating. So it meets quality requirements and criteria prior to delivery of the translated material. This includes revision. And let me tell you that many translators are not sure what these terms mean. So let's talk about this. So revision. Revision is comparative reading of the target text, the end source text to pick up any mistranslations, missing translations, grammatical errors, and to check if the translation complies with the client specification. So once again, revision is comparing, when you're comparing the target text against the source text, and you're trying to pick up any mistranslations, missing translation, grammatical errors. This is also a process of, and sometimes as a professional translator, you might be asked and hired only to do the revision. As a translator, you might do the transfer, but then somebody else is going to do the revision. But this is still part of the translation workflow. And then there is a proofreading. Proofreading involves working mainly with the target text only, usually. So proofreading generally happens at the post-layout stage to check for spelling, punctuation, and for line breaks and similar things. At this point in general, we are not comparing the source text with the target text, and proofreading focuses mostly on the form of the text more than the meaning. So that's proofreading. We are trying to catch all these small mistakes, spelling, punctuation, line breaks. So there's a revision, proofreading, and there's editing. So editing may or may not be part of the translation process. It also focuses on the target text. So not on the target text, not on the source text as much, with little or no reference to the source text at this point. And it refers to making the text better in terms of style and readability, considering the purpose and target audience of the text. And finally, there's a validation of revision and delivery. So this is carried out by the initial translator responsible for the quality of the final translation. The translation reviews all the challenges that were brought to the text in the revision stage and validates them, or in some cases rejects the changes if they do not improve the text. I know this is maybe overwhelming, so let me be very brief and show how it works. Let's say I'm a translator. I work for MCI. Somebody calls me from MCI. So they're saying, hey, Dusan, there is a job for you. We want you to translate from English into Serbian. And I was like, great. And now we are discussing. I want this much money. How many pages? When do you need this for? 3 days, that's not enough. How much you're paying? This many dollars for per page. I need more money, or I need more time. And they're sending me the text, and I'm doing the research. I was like, I don't even understand what this text is about. Tell me the context. And they're telling me it's confidential. You can only get this page. And then I'm negotiating. I know it's confidential, but when I do that, I finally sit at home. I have my source text. I'm doing translation. I'm doing my translation. I'm excited. I'm done with 5 pages in 5 days. I'm like, I'm getting paid. That's amazing. Then I'm sending it back to MCIS. So I negotiated, I did the research, then I did the transfer. I did translation. But then it's going back to MCIS. They're hiring somebody to do revision. That means there's another translator who is going to be comparing the source text with the target text. That person is going to be evaluating basically my translation, making comments. And then there's editing. And there is the proofreading. Somebody is going to start to catch, small mistakes, not translation mistakes, but mistakes when it comes to punctuation, page breaks, and paragraphs, these things. And there's editing involved, corrections, validation. And then it comes back to me. They're saying, Dusan, somebody did the revision. They're sending back to you. Make sure that, let's see if you agree with this other person, the way they corrected your text. So that's coming back to me. And then I am accepting the revision, or I am challenging it. So let's say last week, literally, I did one of the translations. I did a negotiation. I did everything. I did a translation. I sent it back to the agency, to the law firm. They sent it back. Somebody revised my text. They were not super happy with some of the things. Some of the things that that reviser did, I accepted. Some of them, I challenged them, but we agreed eventually. So finally, the process, the second step of translation is done. However, there's the last step of the translation process. So once again, we did pre-translation, getting the job and receiving the text. We did now translation, which is negotiation, terminology management, phraseology management, setting up the environment for the translation. We finally did the translation. We sent out translation, somebody revised it, proofreading has been done, editing, I got it back, I accepted, and I validated the validated the revision, and now it's done. However, there's this last step. Last step is the post-translation. This is the last step of the translation process, where you might be or might not be involved. Again, now we're talking of the translation workflow. It doesn't mean as a professional translator, you will be involved in all of these steps. You might be involved in only 1 or 2 steps. But we are discussing all of the steps. I simply want you to be aware, what does it mean to do the entire translation project? So let's talk about the last step, which is post-translation. So finally, the last third step is post-translation. Post-translation is everything after the translation has been completed and quality checked, such as integrating the translated material, and admin tasks. When I say integrating the translated material, that means document layout prior to publishing, integration of the translated material into the website, and admin tasks. Invoicing, archiving the project, consolidating terminology for future similar projects. Again, as a translator, you're obviously not going to be doing, being asked to integrate text into the layout, into the website, but you will be asked this second part, which is admin. You will be asked to send the invoice. You're still involved partially into this process, right? And then we have formatting or integration. So that means translation is ready, but there are projects that might require layout formatting on any other reassembling of the target document by incorporating graphics, images, and tables. So this may also entail printing the document or saving it on DVD or CD or hard drive. Normally, this stage is performed, keep in mind, by other specialists like graphic designer, webmaster, and project coordinator. But keep in mind, sometimes translators are more engaged into these steps and they are expected to do it. So be very careful when you accept the translation project. What am I exactly supposed to do here? When it comes to pre-translation, translation, and post-translation, you have to know. It's very important. Trust me, you have to know. Because if you don't know, they might ask you to do more and more things that you didn't sign up for or you were not aware. You have to always ask. So there is a research, there is a transfer. Are you supposed to validate the revision? And after you're done in translation, yes, you're supposed to send an invoice. That's logical, unless there is other way of payment. But then when it comes to formatting, integration, make sure that you're not expected to put this into the website, because trust me, happened to me. They're all great. Now here's the login information for the website, so upload it. And I'm like, I wasn't even aware that I'm supposed to do that. Well, my mistake, because I didn't ask properly. What does it mean? Because once again, as a translator, somebody can ask you to do many of these steps, but some other organization is going to ask you only to do pre-translation and translation. You have to do nothing to do with the post-translation other than sending emails. But once again, make sure that you understand. Also, there is final delivery. This is obviously done by the agency usually. Final delivery is the translated material is validated and delivered to the client or project coordinator. Sometimes delivery of the translation does not mean the end of the translator's work, keep in mind. So yes, when you do final delivery, you're doing it to the organization. But then the organization has to do it to the final client, if there is a final client. So if you're working for an agency, so if there's a client, agency, and a translator, you're submitting it to the agency is submitting it to the client. Of course, you should not be doing it directly unless you're supposed to. And then keep in mind, once again, sometimes the delivery of the translation does not mean the end of the translator's work. If there's a translation memory, sometimes the translator is supposed to update the translation memory. And this is a new area of translation that we have to be familiar. Sometimes you need to update the resources. Sometimes you have to mail the original. Sometimes you have to store the information, make sure to rename it properly. So that might be your job as a translator as well. And at the end, as I said, the translator sends the invoice to the client. So, dear language professionals, I know this was very brief and very, very short, and this was a very short overview of what translation and translation workflow are. We can talk about this for hours, and I hope we will get a chance to talk about this for hours. I hope I did not confuse you more. I hope I brought some clarity. And I hope that in the future we will have much more time to discuss these topics. And let's jump to some of the questions. We have 5-6 minutes. There are so many phenomenal questions. And let me just say this, I do have to say, I'm truly impressed with the amount of questions and the complexity of the questions we received. We have time to cover only a few of them that are more general. Some of the questions are so amazing and so complex that we need 20 minutes to discuss them. And I would love to have them time, but I'm gonna give, let's jump to some of them. Okay, I'm gonna keep quiet and listen to the questions.
Thank you so much. It was a very, very interesting introduction to translation. And as a translation trainer, I could completely relate to the way you were explaining each and every concept so clearly. Thanks again from all of us. And as you mentioned, we received a lot of questions through the Google Forms. We have time only for some of them, but of course, we would try and respond to each and every one of them later in our blog or in one of our publications. So here goes. The first question says, how is automation affecting the translation workflow?
This is a very interesting question. How's automation affecting the translation workflow? It's definitely making translation workflow and processes way more efficient. Many manual tasks can be automated nowadays. And this is something that I'm struggling to accept because it's great that we have automation and that many things can be done, but sometimes I'm feeling, where's my place in this industry? Is machine gonna replace me? So for example, the delivery that was being done manually before, click, billion emails. Now, if you're using a system, it can be done automatically. And MCIs, we use that. So automation is amazing. especially when it comes to certain tasks, such as delivery to revisor, delivery to the client. So in that way, translator gets to do more of the fun stuff, which is translation, right? And we get time to be more efficient. We don't have to send 20 emails to deliver a project like we used to 20 years ago. We can go to the system, click, submit it, that's it. Rather than saying, "Dear project coordinator, here's my translation. Please let me know." By the time I write email, it takes me 20 minutes sometimes to make sure that I am properly addressing the person. So yes, automation is amazing. It's helping us to focus more on translation rather than all the admin tasks.
Thanks a lot. The next question is also related. In today's developing technological world, can one pursue his or her career as a freelancer?
Yes, yes, and yes. Let me just tell you one thing. You always have to be stay up to date on latest technologies. And keep in mind, you don't have to be an expert on all technologies, but many agencies, organizations, governmental organizations will greatly appreciate openness and willingness to learn. Old school translators, such as my parents or my grandparents, oh my gosh, they're so old school. You know, they don't want to, machine translation is a rocket science to them, using different programs. And I know it might be overwhelming, but trust me, at the end of the day, it helps. So one of my best friends, she's a little bit older generation. She's in her late 60s, a little bit older, and she's struggling just to accept that there is a change. And many young translators in their 20s, we don't want to accept the change. Yes, in today's developing technological world, we can definitely we can pursue our careers as freelance translators. However, we have to stay up to date on latest technology. We have to be able to accept machine translation. We have to be able to accept new programs. We have to keep our online profiles updated, like LinkedIn, Pros. We have to be able to learn how to expand our business. We have to do many other things other than translation. We have to be able to properly promote and market ourselves. But yes, it's a great career and there is a lot of future there. Next question.
Yes, thank you. The next one is, please provide the difference between translation and adaptation and its relevance.
This is a very interesting question. So translation, when you say translation is not always sufficient to get the meaning across. And in those cases, you would need to adapt, definitely. So for example, if you were to translate the expression, "It's raining cats and dogs" in English, word for word into another language, it would be ridiculous. And some not translators that are not good, they do literally translate things. So the target audience would never understand what you actually want to say. So, and there are many expressions like that. There are many ways that you need to do adaptation. That being said, some will argue that good translation is adaptation. So good translation is actually adaptation, because if you want to do good translation, that is actually adaptation. You have to be able to adapt, to be creative. So once again, many people, even when it comes to translation theory, many would say, well, the good translation is actually adaptation. And I think maybe we have time for one more question because, yeah.
Yes. And the next question has many sub-questions. So should I go one by one, or do I?
You can just read them and let me try to summarize. Yeah.
Okay. So here it goes. Is being a translator worth it? How much is the salary? Is it a stable career? How can I strive to be the topmost in this field? How will we translate? And can we go abroad, maybe to Germany or South Korea, to settle there with this job? If so, then how?
So this is a series of questions that I absolutely love, and this is something. Let's be completely honest. If somebody, a translator, tells you, "Oh, from the day one, I was like, sure, this is going to be my career, and I'm going to have a great living out of it," most likely they're not being 100% honest. Most likely, I'm not saying. It's a challenging field. It's fun, it's creative, it's exciting, but it does take time. So first of all, once you establish yours as a good freelance translator, we talk about freelance translator at this point. First of all, you can always, if you get a job to work as a permanent translator for a university, agency, organization, a government, international organization, all good. You're set for a while, you know, you're good. But let's talk about, of course, that's like any job, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Of course, you can live as a translator. But let's talk about freelance translator, which is most of us. You know, you're working for many different organizations. Initially, it's going to be hard. But if you're good, and if you invest in your professional development, if you market yourself properly, if you stay up to date when it comes to technology, you can be extremely happy with your career. It can be very fulfilling career, and you can make a very good living out of it. I'm telling you because I do have many friends and many people in my environment who are making great living being full-time translators. It's a huge industry. And keep in mind, immigration, the whole world became a global village. Translation and interpretation, but translation especially, is needed more than ever. People are traveling all the time. People are immigrating. Canada is a country of immigrants. Translation is essential here. So can you live up, again, as a freelance translator? Yes, you can have a great life, but yes, it's not going to be easy in the beginning. And again, I'm talking as a freelance. If you come to Canada or you work in India for a government, then that's not really the same question. You work full-time, then sure, when you have work, you're fine. But I'm talking as a freelance translator. It can be a great, fulfilling, financially rewarding career, but you do need to struggle maybe in the beginning. When I say struggle, not necessarily financially struggle, but you have to market yourself. You have to develop, many people say translators are good, they very often they're introverts. Well, you have to have extroverted side because you have to sell your skills. You have to be able to market yourself, to promote yourself, to go and get that job. You have to be able to network. It's about who you know and how you present yourself. Of course, about the quality of your work. That's a must. And you have to be able to do professional development. And let me just tell you my story in 2 seconds. Can you go? Yes. So how I moved to Canada, this is so I was studying linguistics and my major, linguistic with translation. Back home, you don't have translation studies, just to make it clear. It's linguistics, and then you study translation within the linguistics. And I was studying quite a few languages, Arabic and English and Serbo-Croatian literature. And people were telling me, are you crazy? You're smart. Why are you studying something that like translation linguistics? Who needs that? And funny enough, people were studying to be engineers, doctors back home, lawyers. And I could have studied that, but I wanted to be a translator. So I finished my school, and then I applied for immigration to Canada as a professional translator. And that's how I moved to Canada. That's how I got citizenship, as a professional translator. So, sometimes, and people who finished law school back home were not able. So I'm just saying, you never, something that seems to be limited and something that seems to be challenging might be actually very easy for some people. So can you move abroad? Yes, you can. I moved and I got Canadian permanent residency and citizenship afterward as a professional translator. Like literally, that's my immigration. That's how I moved to Canada as a skilled working translator. Can you make good money? Yes, you can make amazing money. But can you start making great money from day one? It's very challenging unless you work full-time for an organization. You do need to invest in your professional development. You need to develop communication skills, and you need to be able to market yourself properly. Having said that, I just want to thank everybody. We are running out of time. This was a wonderful opportunity to meet a wonderful group of professional translators. And once again, I hope this is just the first webinar that we will continue our collaboration in the future. Thank you. Back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dushan, for such a wonderful, I would not say it was a webinar. I would say it was more like a workshop. People could talk to you. They could, to be honest, there are so many questions that people have. I'll just read out a question, such very interesting question from Steve Depp. He's asking, do you think pre-translation, post-translation sequence could be presented as a circle? Should post-translation in one project feed into pre-translation of the next project? Now, these are very interesting questions, and I like you said in the beginning, we have so many questions, very relevant questions, very interesting questions. It's just sad that, we have run out of time and we can't take all the questions, but we will bother you and we'll request you to answer those questions, which we'll cover in our in our newsletter, which is called IndoVox, and I'm sure that would be something that most of our members would love to reach out for their answers. And on behalf of CITLoB and all the members here, I really would like to thank you for your time, for such a wonderfully presented session, and a very nicely explained, very simply explained, very easy to understand such a complex process of translation. Thank you very much, Dushan. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I do promise we will answer every single question. I'm actually truly impressed with the complexity of the questions. And some of them, again, phenomenal questions. We will respond to every single one of them, but we can maybe have another Q&A session, just one session, then we're going to have questions and answers. Or maybe next month, or something similar. Or maybe now, after we discuss these things, we can discuss further the topics, but definitely we will respond to every single question. Some of them are really interesting, and actually that made me think, which is phenomenal. Some of them are like a circle. I love it. I love this question. Whoever answered it, I'm impressed. So some of them, like, definitely amazing topics to think about it, but we will answer to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of CITLoB, I thank you all again, and look forward to the next, to seeing you all on the next webinar. Equally interesting, and maybe we'll call Dushan for another session.
Absolutely.
Deep dive into some concept that you gave. Thank you very much. All right, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lester. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining in.
Thank you.